Her hands were steady. That was the thing nobody ever mentioned afterward, that while the waiting room erupted and the overhead lights flickered, and someone down the hall was screaming, Sergeant Joanna Kessler's hands were completely, unnaturally still. She had been a VA floor nurse for 6 years by then. Before that, she'd been something else entirely. But nobody at Bridgeport Veterans Medical Center knew that in part. Not charge nurse Delgado, who had hired her, Dr. Okafor, who signed her annual reviews. Not even the patients she'd sat with through their worst nights. The ones who grabbed her wrist when the nightmares came back. Women won't fold their wife, who whispered things they hadn't told their wives. None of them knew what Kessler had been before she put on scrubs. That wasn't an accident. It arrived at Bridgeport 6 years earlier with 2 things. A nursing license and a very specific reason for choosing this hospital over the dozen others that had called her back. The VA military patients, the kind of care that was supposed to be different from the civilian system, supposed to mean something. She had believed that once. Of a slur spoke. Maybe she had needed to believe it, the way you need to believe a thing after you've given enough of yourself to it. That disbelief becomes a kind of amputation. The day it started unraveling wasn't dramatic. That was the part she kept coming back to later. It started with a medication discrepancy on a Tuesday afternoon in February, the kind of thing that was easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully, and easy to explain away if you didn't already have a reason to look twice. In room 14, Mr. Harlan Pruitt, 67. Army veteran, bilateral knee replacement, routine post-op recovery. His chart showed he'd received his afternoon pain management. He told Kessler he hadn't. She checked the log. She checked it again. She cross-referenced the dispensary record. The numbers didn't match by a margin too consistent to be clerical error. Envy wrote it up. She submitted the incident report through the proper channels. The ones the handbook said existed for exactly this purpose. She copied charge nurse Delgado and flagged it urgent. Delgado called her into the small office. By the supply room, 2 days later, Joanna reviewed it. Delgado said, logging error. It's been corrected. Kessler asked to see the correction. Delgado's expression shifted in a way that Kessler recognized. Not anger, not quite, but something older and colder than anger. It's been handled, Kessler. For 3 weeks, she let it go. In a second one. Of disappearance. Different patient, same ward, same pattern, documented as administered, denied by the patient, a gap in the dispensary log that had been filled in with a different pen. She photographed it with her phone before she submitted anything. She had learned that much in another life. Document before you report, because reports have a way of disappearing. Nasir spoke. By the time she found the 3rd discrepancy, she had a folder. It wasn't only medication logs. She had started noticing other things. Supply requisitions for equipment that never arrived on the ward, billing codes on patient charts that didn't match the procedure she had personally assisted with, consult orders that were generated and then quietly voided before the specialists were ever actually contacted. Each thing was small. Each thing had an explanation. But the pattern didn't have an explanation. And the pattern was what Kessler kept returning to in the evenings when she sat at her kitchen table with the folder open in front of her. She had been trained to find patterns. That was the other thing. Nobody at Bridgeport knew about her. She submitted a formal complaint to the hospital's compliance office in March. She sent a copy to the regional VA inspector's office. She sent a 3rd copy to a patient advocacy organization she'd found through a veterans' rights group because she had learned something else in her previous life. Never rely on a single channel. 2 weeks later, she was called into a meeting with Bridgeport's chief medical officer, Dr. Aldrich Vance. Also present. The hospital's legal counsel, a woman named Cheryl who didn't offer a last name, and a man Kessler didn't recognize who was introduced as being from hospital administration and who never spoke. Dr. Vance was the kind of man who wore his authority like a well-fitted coat. Silver at the temples. Careful diction. The practice warmth of someone who had learned that warmth costs nothing and buys a great deal. We take these concerns seriously, he said. We want you to know that. A line. Kessler sat across from him and kept her face neutral. She had spent years learning how to keep her face neutral in rooms where the people across from her wanted a reaction. The compliance office has completed a preliminary review. We've found some documentation inconsistencies. This is not uncommon in a facility of our size and volume. We're implementing additional training and updated logging protocols. He pushed a paper across the desk toward her. It was a summary of findings. It was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned no names, no dollar amounts, no patient harm. It was, in the precise technical sense of the word, nothing. Amen. We also want to discuss your recent pattern of behavior, Dr. Vance continued. The warmth had not left his voice. That was the most unsettling part. Multiple informal complaints from colleagues. Concerns about your communication style. We want to support you, Joanna. Her name. It was the first time he had used her first name. She did not respond. We're recommending a formal performance improvement plan, 60 days. We think this is an opportunity. Renewed. I'd like a copy of those colleague complaints, Kessler said. Spoke silence. Mine, you said there were multiple informal complaints. I'd like copies. And again, Cheryl spoke for the first time. Those are confidential personnel matters. I understand that, Kessler said. I'd still like to see them. Administrator spoke. She was placed on administrative leave the following morning. The official language was pending review of patient safety concerns. The unofficial language, the kind that traveled through the ward in lowered voices that made people she had worked alongside for 6 years look away when she walked to her locker to collect her things, was something else. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for a long time that morning. The sky was the flat gray of early spring, the kind that promises nothing. She thought about calling someone. She ran through the list of people she might call and arrived, as she often did, at the conclusion that the list was shorter than it should have been. She drove home. She opened her laptop. She started making a different kind of file. Nodded geared. In the weeks that followed, Kessler did what she had always done when a situation exceeded its official channels. She went around them. She filed a complaint with the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. She contacted a journalist. Not someone prominent, but someone careful, someone who covered healthcare fraud. With the specific methodical patience of a person who understood that these stories take time. Woman's a command to gear. Coached. She reached encrypted channels to a former colleague, not from nursing, from before, who had expertise in financial forensics and owed her a favor she had never intended to collect. That speeder. She also kept her folder. She organized it. She cross-referenced it. She built a timeline that stretched back not 6 months, but closer to 3 years. Because when she started pulling the thread kept going. Minutus grande. The medication discrepancies were the surface. Below the surface was a billing operation. Patients billed for services not rendered, equipment charged to federal accounts and then redirected. When a soldier spoke. Pharmaceutical invoices submitted twice under different procedure codes. The man, who had never spoken Dr. Vance's office, appeared in 3 different contexts in the financial records she was slowly assembling. His name was Linwood, and eventually. She found it eventually, cross-referencing a procurement contract with a vendor registration database. Linwood. She wrote it down. Many about her spoke. She was careful. She was methodical. and she was lonely in a way that she had learned, over many years, to treat as simply a condition of the work, rather than a reflection of anything about herself. Note: her formal termination letter arrived on a Wednesday. It cited performance deficiencies and unprofessional conduct. It was very clean. It did not mention the complaints she had filed, which was legally required, and technically achieved by never directly acknowledging those complaints existed. The letter twice. She put it in the folder. Not. The manager spoke. There was a diner 4 blocks from her apartment that she had eaten at most Thursday mornings for the past 3 years. She went there the Thursday after she received the letter. Booth in the back. Coffee she didn't really want. She was staring at the parking lot through the window when a woman sat down across from her without asking. Hurt. Kessler looked at her. Come in. The woman was maybe 40, nondescript in the particular way that suggested it was intentional, the kind of neutral appearance that took effort to achieve. She wore no lanyard, no badge. She set nothing on the table. Darling, you've been making noise, the woman said. Gentlemen, you've been watching me make it, Kessler said, and looked at her for a moment. Something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in her expression. How long did you know? Parking lot? 3 days ago. Different car, same plates. People forget that the plates matter more than the car. Maz, you were 18 Delta. And a question. 18 Delta. Special Forces Medical Sergeant. The designation Kessler had carried for 8 years before she had quietly, formally, and completely left that life behind. I was, Kessler said. Well, we know what you've built, the woman said. The file, the timeline, the journalist contact. And waited. Kessler fan. I'm sure you. We've been building something too, longer than you, bigger than Bridgeport. The woman set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. Linwood connects to 11 other facilities. VA contracts across 4 states. The number we're looking at is north of $40 million over 5 years. Men a year. Kessler looked at the paper without touching it. Why are you here? As you're inside it in a way we're not. You have documentation that predates ours. You have patient-level records we can't access without triggering alerts. And you have. The woman paused again, choosing her words with visible care. A particular set of skills that are useful when the situation stops being bureaucratic. For me to go back in. Not so? Alder. We're asking you to finish what you started. Parking lot. Kessler looked at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a station wagon. A kid was sitting on a curb looking at his phone. The sky had gone from gray to a pale washed blue that almost looked like hope. Debate, she said. Not a question. Not quite an accusation either. A statement of understanding, arriving late. A woman across the table didn't flinch. We needed someone with your background, your instincts, someone who would document correctly, someone the system would underestimate because they'd see the scrubs first. I'd stopped? If I'd let it go after the first write-up, the operation would have needed a different approach. A beat. But you didn't stop, Kessler said. I didn't. I misspoke. She drank her coffee. It had gone cold. She thought about the 6 years she had spent believing that patient care at the VA was supposed to mean something. She thought about Mr. Pruitt in room 14, 67 years old, bilateral knees, who had been told he'd received medication he hadn't received. Meant. She thought about the number. $40 million, 5 years, 11 facilities, and what it meant in terms of the men and women who had come home and been handed a system that had quietly decided they were worth more as a billing line than as patients. About her hands. How they had always been steady. How that steadiness was not a gift, but a choice made and remade across years of circumstances that would have shaken anyone who hadn't specifically trained themselves not to be shaken. I'll need full access, she said. not liaison status. Full integration. Menson, that can be arranged. Ackerman spoke. I need the financial forensics contact I've already been working with brought formally in, not as a contractor, as a member of the team. Ackerman agreed. Lullabies and the journalist. Consem. The woman's expression shifted. That's negotiable. Non-negotiable. Kessler looked at her directly. The end of this operation needs to be public, not a quiet resolution, not sealed records and reassigned administrators. The people who were harmed by this deserve to know what was done to them. That's my condition. At a long pause. Outside, the woman with the station wagon had finished with her groceries. The kid had put his phone away and was just sitting, looking at nothing in particular, in the way that kids sometimes do when they're thinking something through. Mines agreed, the woman said finally. I missed a card across the table. No name on it. Just a number. Kessler looked at it for a moment. What do I call you? Pharmacist thesid Sigbearing. Your name? Is that your name? No, soldier. It's what I go by. Earning Retigat. Kessler picked up the card. She thought about the folder on her kitchen table, the timeline, the cross-references. 3 years of Linwood's operation, mapped out in her meticulous, very particular hand. The hand that had once mapped IED placement patterns in a valley in Afghanistan, that had once stabilized a femoral bleed in a forward operating base with no anesthesiologist and 2 minutes to work, that had once done things she still did not talk about in any context, to anyone. A hand that had never shaken. Not once. When do we start? She said. Man speed. Sterling stood. She left exact change on the table for the coffee she hadn't ordered. You already did. Joanna Soldier spoke. What followed was 4 months that Kessler later described to exactly no one. That was not unusual for her. She had lived through things she had described to exactly no one, and had arrived at a functional peace with that fact. Emma the Bridgeport. She went back into Bridgeport, not as a nurse, not officially, but in the way that someone with her background could move through institutional spaces, without needing an official designation. She had access to former patients through the advocacy organization she'd already been working with. She had the financial forensics contact. His name was Drummond, former IRS, Mitel Smoke, meticulous in a way the Kessler respected, now working with her directly. She had Sterling's team running parallel on the contractor-level investigation, while Kessler worked the clinical side. She had the journalists. She also had the journalist. His name was Patrick Sewell, and he had been covering healthcare fraud for 11 years with the specific unhurried patience of someone who had learned that these stories rarely broke quickly and almost always broke. Eventually. She had called him 4 months before Sterling showed up in the diner. He had been waiting. Everything. She told him when she called after the diner meeting. Not permanently, but the timing matters. Come on. How long? Months. Maybe 4. What am I holding? About. She thought about it. A story about what happens when the people who were supposed to come home to something come home to nothing. And the people who were supposed to care start treating that nothing as an opportunity. The girl was quiet for a moment. I'll hold it, he said. Through April. She worked through May. In June, Drummond traced the final link in the financial chain, not to Linwood, who they had expected, meant to Sortium, but through Linwood to a private healthcare consortium that had been quietly acquiring VA contractor relationships across the region for 7 years. The name of the consortium's primary investor appeared on exactly one document, in a footnote to an acquisition filing from 2019. Dr. Aldrich Vance. Kessler sat with that for a long time. The practiced warmth, the careful diction, the piece of paper with 4 paragraphs and no names and no dollar amounts. The way he had said her first name, Joanna, in a tone that was meant to convey concern and had conveyed instead a very specific kind of contempt. Ellen, she called Sterling. Mance is the investor, she said. Come on, the guide. Sterling's silence lasted 3 full seconds. You're certain? Ackerman is certain. I'm certain. Ackerman, send it. Ackerman. She sent it. Within 48 hours, the operation shifted from investigative to actionable. Within 2 weeks, federal investigators were in Bridgeport with warrants. Within a month, the warrants had extended to 7 of the 11 facilities on Linwood's network. Recommended Final 1. Kessler gave her documented file to Sewell the day before the first warrant was executed. She had told him it was coming. He had been ready. Man, the story ran on a Tuesday morning. Not on a major national outlet. Sewell worked for a regional publication, but the story was picked up within hours. Because it had everything. $43 million, veterans who had been systematically defrauded of care, a network that stretched across 4 states, expenditure, and a chief medical officer whose name had appeared on a VA commendation letter as recently as 18 months prior. Enters. Kessler read it at her kitchen table, with the folder still open in front of her, though it was largely empty now. Most of what had been in it had been submitted, documented, officially entered into federal proceedings. Speen. She had not been included in the story by name. That had been her choice. Sewell had asked, twice. She had said no both times, and he had respected it, because he was the kind of journalist who respected the sources, who had handed him the thing that made his career. At the table for a while, the morning was quiet. Outside, the street was doing what streets do, a delivery truck. Someone walking a dog. 2 neighbors stopping briefly to exchange a few words about something ordinary, and then continuing on in separate directions. At 9:15, did not 10:15, Sterling said. The sun, most of it, Kessler said. Ahmed? Sterling agreed. There was a pause. There will be a formal process. Depositions. You'll be needed. I know. Another pause. There are other facilities. Other networks. What you built here, the methodology, the cross-referencing, it works. Reno looked at the empty folder. She thought about what it had taken to build it. The evenings at the kitchen table. The loneliness she had treated as a condition of the work. In something. The 6 years of believing in something, and then the particular grief of watching that something prove itself unworthy of the belief. And then the longer, stranger work of deciding that the belief itself, in the patience, in what the care was supposed to mean, was still worth holding even after the institution had failed it. I know it works, she said. Mine, Tagir spoke. We could use someone who can move through clinical environments the way you do. Someone with your background. It? I'll think about it. She meant it. She genuinely would. But not today. Today she was going to sit at her table with her coffee, and the morning light coming through the window and the knowledge that $43 million of stolen care was no longer being stolen, and that the men and women in 11 VA facilities across 4 states would receive, starting now, what they had earned and been owed. Amen. It wasn't everything. Child. It was never everything, but it was something real, and real things were how you built toward the next thing. And Sergeant Joanna Kessler had always been better at building than at anything else. Her hands rested flat on the table, completely still. Mine. That had always been the thing about her, the thing nobody had known until they did. And about that Tuesday in February. I keep thinking about that Tuesday, a medication log. A number that didn't add up. Most people would have flagged it once, been told it was a clerical error, and moved on. That's not a criticism. That's just what happens when you're working 12-hour shifts and the system tells you it handled something. You let it go. You have to. Madigan. Kessler didn't let it go, and I've spent a long time thinking about why. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't ambition. It was something quieter than either of those things. A sense of what was owed. To Mr. Pruitt in room 14, who rifles drawn. To every veteran who had come home and been handed a system that was supposed to mean something. She had seen, up close and in conditions most people never encounter, what it costs a person to serve. She knew the weight of that debt. And she wasn't willing to pretend a 4-paragraph summary, with no names in it, was the same thing as settling it. What I think of when I think about integrity, not the dramatic version, not the whistleblower on the courthouse steps. The Tuesday version, not use motes. Not the one where you photograph the log before you submit the report because you already understand how these things disappear. The one where you sit in your car in the parking lot afterward, from what you just started, and you drive home anyway and open your laptop and begin. What Kessler built. The folder, the timeline, the cross-references, that was intelligence. Not the credential kind, the practiced kind, the kind that comes from learning to trust patterns over explanations, from knowing that a single anomaly is a mistake, but a consistent one is a choice. She didn't have a federal team behind her when she started. She had her own eyes and the discipline to use them carefully. And that discipline is not a gift you're born with. It's a skill. You build it by paying attention when it costs you something to pay attention. And then there is the third thing, the one that doesn't get talked about enough. She kept going when she had every reason to stop. Placed on leave. Formally terminated. The letter with its clean language and its complete absence of acknowledgement. Not e.g. edit. There is a particular kind of endurance required in that moment. Not the loud kind, not the kind that looks like courage from the outside, but the kind that looks like a woman sitting at a kitchen table with an empty folder and a laptop and a very long list of things she still needs to do. That's the endurance that actually changes things. Not the moments people will notice, the ones they won't. I'm at $43 million, 11 facilities, 5 years. One Tuesday in February. The outcome was inevitable. I think it happened because one person chose not to look away from a number that didn't add up, and then chose it again and kept choosing it. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's a series of decisions made by someone who had decided a long time ago what she was willing to be. The image I carry from her story is the simplest one. Morning light, kitchen table, hands resting flat, completely still. And it happened because nothing as she was, because she had decided who she was, and that decision had held.